Christmas. Every major holiday has its own unique identity and spirit associated with it, but Christmas time is really something quite special. There is a reason that, out of the millions, nay billions of people who celebrate the holiday around the world, so many regard it as the most wonderful time of the year. The fundamental origin of the holiday is known to many Christians and non-Christians alike. It's a celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ, the second most important event in Christian belief. However, what is not as often clear are the origins of many of the customs and traditions associated with Christmas. May I ask, for example, why did you put a tree in your living room and decorate it? And why did you hang giant socks on your fireplace while you were at it? Likely because you are expecting a guest. A large man in a red suit from the North Pole will be coming your way the night before Christmas aboard a sleigh steered by flying reindeer. Once he lands on your roof, he'll be entering your house through your chimney to leave you gifts, as long as you and your family have been good throughout the year. These things are so familiar to those of us who celebrate Christmas that we don't even bat an eye at them. But when you put it like that, it does make you wonder, where did all these things come from? How did they begin? Why did they begin? How did they change throughout history? And how do they vary today around the world? Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to Fire of Learning. In this very special presentation, we'll be finding out as we explore the history of Christmas. And now, in the words of a particularly fitting ghost, rise and walk with me. Where do we begin with the history of Christmas? This time of year was an important time for many cultures around the world even prior to Christianity. A time of feasting, of celebration, of religious and cultural significance. So the question is, are Yule and these Roman traditions like Saturnalia ancient versions and predecessors of modern Christmas? It's complicated. People, especially in the distant past, rarely kept precise records of these things. Historians therefore have to piece these things together like a puzzle, which can be complicated. It's not always easy to know whether or not something in history has influenced a holiday, or to determine how much precisely it has done so, and one must be careful in working it out. Just because certain traditions seem similar, or are practiced at the same time, does not necessarily mean they are related. Several East Asian and Native American societies, for example, had festivals around the same time. There's no relation to Christmas, it's just the winter solstice is a very natural time to place a holiday. Not necessarily because of the solstice itself, but because agricultural work is done for the year. People might have a sort of psychological need for release from the hardships of the cold, etc. That was a bit of a tangent, but it's necessary to keep these things in mind. Because misinformation about holidays and their history is not only common, it quite honestly seems to be the norm. It's all a bit complicated and confusing, but fear not, my friends, for we have only just begun, and it becomes clearer as we go. As these holidays were taking place, there were important events taking place in the Levant that were about to change everything. The story of the Nativity, Jesus' birth to the Virgin Mary in a stable in the town of Bethlehem, is absolutely central to the Christian religion and the Christmas holiday's development over the subsequent 2,000 years. The Christian religion would soon form, and over the next few centuries would grow in popularity. Despite the importance of the story, early Christians do not appear to have placed as much emphasis on the Nativity. They in fact did not celebrate birthdays much in general. There was much more emphasis on Easter and its related holidays. Celebration of Christ's birth, however, would grow in importance when Christianity was adopted by the Roman Empire in the 4th century. But of the many details the Bible gives us regarding the birth of Jesus, it leaves out one very noteworthy one: the date. The Bible never claims that Jesus was born on December 25th, and indeed, Christian theologians argue that the story suggests it more likely took place during any of the other 3 seasons. So why did early Christians decide on December 25th? There are a number of theories, one of which relates to the pagan holidays we just discussed. The Roman Emperor Constantine became the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity in 312 AD. Christianity would be adopted as Rome's official religion under the Emperor Theodosius I later that century. With its place firmly cemented at the heart of European civilization, over the next 1,000 years, Christianity would outcompete and overcome the pagan beliefs of Europe. One of the methods that early Christians like Pope Gregory the Great used to spread Christianity was to allow pagan peoples to continue certain customs and traditions that they were used to, so long as they did not violate Christian belief. In their view, just as the pagans could be baptized into Christianity, some of their traditions could have the paganism washed away from them as well. But is that why Christmas is on December 25th? To replace pagan festivals like Yule, which was held in winter, Saturnalia, which was held in mid-December, and the birth of the unconquerable sun, which was held on December 25th itself. It's tempting to think so, but while it's the popular answer, it is perhaps not the correct one. The problem is that there is no clear evidence that it was set on December 25th to replace pagan festivals, and there is evidence which suggests otherwise. For example, there was a belief in Judaism that all the prophets were either born or conceived and died on the same day. In Christianity, this included Jesus. Early Christian theologians suggested that he was conceived on March 25th, which was also believed to be the date of creation itself. If March 25th is the date of his conception, the Annunciation, then 9 months later would be December 25th. These dates were almost certainly connected to symbolism. They fall near the spring equinox and winter solstice. Accordingly, Jesus' birth was likened to the return of the sun and the warmth and light it brought with it. As for the date of December 25th with regard to the Sol Invictus, it's been suggested by historians like Louis Duquesne that the Christians reserved this date first, and that, in fact, the pagans tried to challenge them by placing their holiday on that date afterwards. As for Yule, the date of December 25th was set before there were enthusiastic efforts to Christianize the Germanic world, so Yule appears to have nothing to do with the date. And as for Saturnalia, the date appears to have been chosen before Christianity took hold among Roman elites, in a time in which Christians heavily distanced themselves from the pagan Roman norm. Regardless of the reasoning, the date stuck, and with the holiday in place, it would set off to evolve into the holiday with which we are all familiar. But this would still take time, and the Christmases of old were still strikingly different from those with which we are familiar. The first Christmas celebration on record took place in Rome on December 25th, 336 AD, though not much is known about these early celebrations. After the Roman Empire fell and Europe entered the early Middle Ages, the holiday and the holiday season would develop further. Epiphany, held on January 6th, was more popular than Christmas itself in the early Middle Ages. Indeed, the Epiphany seems to have been more popular in the East from an earlier time as well. The Nativity was celebrated there on that date in conjunction. Today, in the West, the Feast of the Epiphany is mostly centered on Jesus' appearance to the 3 Magi, his first appearance to Gentiles. In the East, however, there is more focus on his baptism on this date. The date of the Nativity to the date before Epiphany, December 25th to January 5th, is a 12-day period, which is where we get the 12 days of Christmas. The 12 days of Christmastide were more celebrated in the past than they are today, and generally involved 12 days of celebration and feasting. Christmas Day would in fact mark the beginning of celebration rather than the last day. It is also in early Middle Age Europe that we find the origins of Advent. In modern America, though supercenters seem to believe Christmas time begins in the middle of October, the Christmas season truly, unofficially begins the day after Thanksgiving. However, the traditional religious beginning of the season in many denominations is Advent Sunday, the name which refers to the first of 4 Sundays throughout the season. Advent lasts from the 4th Sunday before Christmas to Christmas Eve. In 800 AD, the date of December 25th became somewhat more important to Christians after Charlemagne was crowned emperor on that date, the first of many monarchs to have their coronation on Christmas. From then on, it would grow in importance, until by the High Middle Ages, or about 1000 AD, it was a much more well-established time of feasting and celebration. By this point, the Germanic and Celtic worlds had largely accepted Christianity, with even the Scandinavians beginning to accept it. Interestingly, though Christmas replaced their pagan festivals, they called it, and still continue to call Christmas, Yule. In Anglo-Saxon England, meanwhile, the change had already long been accepted by this point. They called the holiday Christmassa, Christ's Mass. This is, of course, where we get the word Christmas in modern English. In French, it was Noël, Spanish, Navidad, Portuguese, Natal, and in Italian, Natale, all words relating to nativity. In German, it was simply Weihnachten, Holy Night. The tradition of celebrating throughout the 12 days of Christmas continued in many areas of Europe, such as England, throughout the Middle Ages and into the early modern era. Work was often cancelled for this 12-day celebration. To those of us in the modern era, that sounds like quite a lot of time off of work, but in pre-industrial society, there was less work to do at this time of year anyway, especially in agriculture. Christmas customs in England and many other parts of Europe included wearing disguises, music, gift-giving, tale-telling, drinking and feasting, early forms of ice skating, and playing a variety of sports from bowling to wrestling, and games from blind man's bluff to chess. Oh, and look out, as snowball fights are probably as old as human contact with snow. Meanwhile, the poor in particular of many countries would go door to door in costumes, acting out scenes from religious or mythical stories, or providing some other form of entertainment like singing, in exchange for food and drink or money. These groups were not always the most welcome guests, as they could be rather unpleasant and demanding. As a more modern example, if a group of young, impoverished people came to your door saying, "Bring us some figgy pudding, we won't go until we get some," they sometimes meant it. These groups would go so far as to play mischievous tricks on those who denied them. Thankfully, this practice was toned down by the modern world, and ironically, a modified form of it was adopted by Halloween. It appears that by the 12th century, evergreen plants were already playing a role in decoration in England, and may have for quite some time before this. The extent to which this included evergreen trees, however, is not quite clear. Christmas in Western Europe in the late Middle Ages and early modern era was quite a large celebration, with a bit more tolerance for partying and unrestrained hedonism than we would today expect from Christmas. Indeed, it's certainly possible that a piece of the carefree spirit of Saturnalia remained intact. An example of this is a tradition of selecting a certain important figure during Christmas, a figure known by many names. In England, where the tradition was most popular, he was called the Lord of Misrule, or King of the Bean. A partygoer who found a particular hidden bean in a cake would become a kind of master over the others, and would order them to do amusing things. This resembles the Roman king of Saturnalia quite a bit. And yet, it may be coincidence. English historian William Ward Fowler has argued that the tradition arose independently with no connection to Saturnalia. Either way, this was certainly a time in which people strayed from, if not reversed, normality in other ways. In medieval England, clergy would sometimes wear their clothing inside out, and had a custom of leading donkeys inside the church, dining on sausages and wine, burning old shoes in place of incense, and making the sounds of a donkey as they did so. Less bizarrely, there was a custom observed by some of the upper classes of inviting a few members of the lower classes to dine with them. Not everyone approved of the holiday, however, especially its unbridled festivities. In the 16th century, The Protestant Reformation began in Germany and would spread across Europe, finding success in places like part of Germany, Scandinavia, and Britain. The Protestants who broke away from the Catholic Church would themselves begin to break up into a number of different groups. With multiple new varieties of Christianity came multiple different perspectives on Christmas. And since I know the comments are coming, yes, Catholics are Christians, Protestants are Christians, the Orthodox are Christians. I'm not saying you have to agree with each other, but we do have to use an objective and fair definition of what a Christian is. Anyway, there were some Protestant groups in places like Britain in particular who developed a negative opinion of Christmas. While some, like Lutherans and Anglicans from king to peasant, continued celebrating Christmas, other Protestant groups, like the Scottish Presbyterians and English Puritans in particular, looked at it and saw, at best, an unbiblical Catholic holiday which had retained influence over their people, and at worst, a pagan excess of sin and debauchery. During the English Civil War, the Puritan Oliver Cromwell overthrew King Charles I. Christmas would then be banned in England in 1647. Penalties were put in place for anyone caught celebrating. Businesses were ordered to stay open. Government affairs were intentionally scheduled during Christmas. All the while, soldiers patrolled the streets to seize anything related to the holiday. Debate, uproar, and even rioting and violence broke out over this ban, and many continued to celebrate in defiance. The ban was greatly unpopular and was revoked in 1660 when the monarchy was restored under Charles II. Thus, the Merry Monarch returned to England its Merry Christmases. Opinion would still remain divided, however. In places like the British American colonies, Christmas remained even less popular and had been among its Puritan settlers from the start. American Puritans and Quakers were even more enthusiastic than their European counterparts. A ban was placed on Christmas in Boston in 1659. This ban was also revoked a few decades later, but the holiday remained unpopular. There was, however, quite a bit of regional variation, with the North often abstaining, but with more popularity in the South. Christmas reached its lowest level of popularity during and in the decades following the American War of Independence, when Christmas, and nearly all holidays connected to English tradition, were stripped from the calendar. The Puritans would not be the last to ban Christmas celebrations. French revolutionaries at the end of the 18th century, for example, also implemented a Christmas ban. Though a predominantly Catholic country, many of the leading French revolutionaries like Robespierre who sought to separate the country from religion. The same perspective towards Christmas was taken by the Soviets over a century later. Despite brief attempts to ban it in England, France, and America, Christmas emerged intact in the 18th century. However, though there are clear similarities between modern Christmas and these pre-modern Christmases, there are also clearly many notable differences in their characters. Indeed, though, as we have seen, Christmas has quite a long history attached to it, one could say that the Christmas with which we are all familiar, modern Christmas, was created in the Victorian era, in places like Germany, England, and America. It may be surprising that there was so much effort on the part of the Puritans to ban Christmas, but it's easier to understand when we remember that Christmas prior to the 1800s was a much more raucous affair. Even some of those who celebrated Christmas in Europe and America had a desire to tone down the revelry. Throughout the 19th century, Christmas would go from a celebration of wild parties and debauchery to a calmer holiday, which focused on religion, family, and general goodness. This new Christmas would appeal to more people and allow the holiday to take its modern form. A leading figure behind this transition was the famous author Charles Dickens. His book, A Christmas Carol, focusing on the complete transformation in morals and character of a certain Ebenezer Scrooge, published in 1843, became a perfect representation of the values and spirit which would be at the core of the more tamed Christmas that was developing, and would itself help to encourage the change. But Dickens was far from alone. Writers like Washington Irving helped to popularize the holiday among Americans, and many, including persons of influence, became interested. It is at this time that we begin to see many Christmas traditions, like Christmas trees, and figures, like Santa Claus, beginning to take their modern forms. The origins of these traditions are a story in their own right, and will be discussed individually later on in the video. But for now it will suffice to say, some came from ancient traditions, others from modern invention, and some from abroad. As it happened, Christmas was reshaping itself in a time of a great movement of people. Immigrants from across Europe, with a particular emphasis on the area that would become Germany, were bringing their customs to the Anglo-American Christmas. In the United States, the puritanical dislike of Christmas remained strong, and acceptance came more slowly. Indeed, at this time, the country celebrated fewer holidays than Europeans in general. The only truly national holidays at this time were Independence Day and Thanksgiving. When Christmas was celebrated, it was usually outside the Northeast. As is discussed in the book Christmas in America by Penn L. Restad, a Southerner attending Princeton wrote home to a friend in 1805 saying, quote, "You will naturally assume we had a great deal of diversion on Christmas, but this day, which in Carolina is welcomed with so many demonstrations of joy, is here regarded almost with perfect indifference, and passed over as but little more than an ordinary day." End quote. Where it was celebrated, the rowdier Christmas celebrations constituted the norm. But Christmas would reform, and as it did so, it would begin to grow in popularity throughout the 19th century, finally becoming an official public holiday at the federal level in 1870. Once Americans did begin to embrace Christmas, they did so enthusiastically, playing a major role in developing it into its modern form. The Protestant groups in America which had once opposed Christmas, here and elsewhere, like Presbyterians and Calvinists, began to endorse this new, much more Christian Christmas. Furthermore, as a result of change of character, Christmas began to be much more about not just family, but children specifically. As every child today knows, after all, the personification of Christmas himself is focused primarily on them during this time. As we draw nearer to our modern-day Christmas, we find many specific traditions and features have been left unexplained. Let us now go back and look at the origins of things such as Christmas trees, gift-giving, and, of course, Santa Claus. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that Saint Nicholas would soon be there. This poem, to which these opening lines belong, was written by Clement Clarke Moore in 1823. It would be quite an important step in shaping the character we know today in America as Santa Claus. But while America's Santa Claus first took his modern form in the 1800s, his relatives in other countries like Sinterklaas and Father Christmas are far older. Who is Santa Claus, and what are his true origins? A bit like Christmas itself, Santa Claus is the product of history and legend surrounding multiple figures across millennia, fused into a single individual. One of these individuals is his namesake, Saint Nicholas. Saint Nicholas of Myra was a Greek Anatolian traditionally said to have been born in 270 AD in modern-day Turkey, then a part of the Roman Empire. Next to nothing is known of his life with certainty. What is known comes from writers telling his story long after his death, and a number of various legends. According to legend, he was born into a family of Greek Christians who were, according to Michael the Archimandrite, quote, "noble and well off, and surpassed many in their reverence towards Christ." End quote. From an early age, he was recognized as unusually good-natured and devout. As he aged, he retained these traits, and endeavored to join the Christian clergy, eventually becoming Bishop of Myra. Not only would he excel in this role, but it soon became clear that he had a kind of special connection to God. This was seen not only in his devotion and good deeds, but, in fact, the miracles he performed, earning him the name Nicholas the Wonder Worker. His most famous story surrounds his efforts to help a father save his 3 daughters. The father in question found himself unable to pay the wedding dowries of his daughters and feared what this meant for their future. Learning of this, Nicholas snuck over to their house at night and secretly tossed 3 bags of coins into the daughter's window. On the third night of this, the grateful father caught Nicholas in the act, but Nicholas swore him to secrecy. This is but one tale of many, but it is a proper representation of a consistent theme seen with St. Nicholas of his desire to help others, in particular the poor and the young, and to do so in secret. It's easy to see how such a man could inspire the Santa Claus legend we know today, though clearly it does not explain everything. St. Nicholas became a well-known and admired saint across Europe throughout the Middle Ages. His feast day, December 6th, became a date of importance to medieval Christians as well. It naturally became associated with the care for the poor and gift-giving for which he was known. As the traditions surrounding his feast day spread north, the figure seems to have become intertwined with pre-Christian figures and practices. In the Germanic world, this may have included the god Odin, the central figure of the pagan Yule. How much Odin is there to Santa Claus? It isn't clear, but likely not as much as the internet might claim. During the Protestant Reformation, reformers sought to lead people away from the Catholic saints. This included the beloved Saint Nicholas, thereby shaking up the holiday traditions associated with him in the lands that were becoming Protestant. In Germany, Martin Luther himself had the idea of making the gift-giving figure during this time the Christkind, or Christkindl, in place of St. Nicholas. Christkind is German for Christ child. The Lutherans also moved his day of activity from the night of December 5th to the night of December 24th, to further focus the day on Christ. The Christkind gained popularity throughout many areas of Central Europe, though his evolution became rather complicated. It was obviously intended to be an incarnation of the baby Jesus, but the idea of a baby delivering gifts was perhaps a tad unusual, even if he were the Son of God, and so the Christkind was, and is sometimes still, depicted as a gold-haired angel instead. Though the Christkind came into being as a Lutheran attempt to replace a Catholic saint, today, the Christkind, ironically, is more popular among Central European Catholics, and may even be said to work alongside St. Nicholas to bring children gifts and their Christmas trees. Meanwhile, Protestant Germans have commonly adopted a Father Christmas-like figure. By the way, thanks to German Americans, the name Christkindl would also evolve into a nickname for Santa Claus, Kris Kringle. Not all Protestants were prepared to do away with the St. Nicholas figure, however. A famous example of this is found in the Netherlands, where St. Nicholas, or as they call him in Dutch, Sinterklaas, and the celebration of his feast day are as popular as ever. In the Netherlands, Sinterklaas is a figure with a long white beard, dressed in red bishop attire, who rides a white horse. He is often accompanied by a figure or figures known as Zwarte Piet, or Black Pete. Zwarte Piet was perhaps once a spirit helper that was later said to be an African slave, though due to controversy, he is now sometimes displayed as a servant whose face is covered in soot from the chimneys Sinterklaas sends him into. As St. Nicholas travels, he carries with him a large red book containing the names of children who have been good and bad throughout the year. Good children get candy and presents. However, bad children may experience a punishment much worse than waking up to coal on their stockings. They may be caned or taken by Zwarte Piet in a bag and taken back to Spain for a year. The idea that St. Nicholas or Santa Claus figures are accompanied by figures who dole out punishments to bad children is not unique to the lowlands. He is sometimes accompanied by a far more sinister figure. In many parts of Central Europe, like Germany and Austria, St. Nicholas is accompanied by a being called Krampus. Krampus is a sort of demonic cross between a goat and a man. He is a figure likely stemming from pagan Alpine mythology. He is not so much one of St. Nicholas's helpers, however he is tasked with handling the naughty kids. Only that sometimes, when he takes naughty children away in his bag, they don't come back. In eastern France, there is also a related figure known as Father Whipper. Across the English Channel, the figure of Father Christmas is what was and is popular in England. Today, the English Father Christmas is identical to the American Santa Claus, but in the past was a rather different character. The Father Christmas figure dates to at least the middle of the 15th century, and may have even older origins. The 15th century was, of course, before the Protestant Reformation. Indeed, he was not created as a replacement for St. Nicholas, and in fact was a symbol of the traditional English Christmas during the Puritan ban. At first, Father Christmas had no role in gift-giving the children. He was merely the personification of the old Christmas of the age. But his role and image began to change during the Victorian Christmas revival. Depictions of Father Christmas varied, but one common depiction is something along the lines of the great jovial man featured as Charles Dickens' Ghost of Christmas Present, sitting before a feast wearing a green robe lined with fur and a crown of holly. Father Christmas was also often depicted riding his noble steed, a goat. It is from these figures, in a complicated blending of cultures and novel invention, that Santa Claus arose in the United States in the 19th century. Men like John Pintard and the aforementioned Washington Irving appear to have been some of the first to help create the figure. Both were residents of New York City, which was once the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam, and in America without much observance of Christmas, they found themselves pining for the old Dutch traditions. Works like Irving's semi-legendary 1809 History of New York helped to expose Sinterklaas to a larger American audience. The name Sinterklaas morphed into Santa Claus in English. In the subsequent decades, Santa Claus would evolve into the American symbol of Christmas, and as others picked up the legend, they would add to his story. In 1821, the poem Old Santa Claus with Much Delight was published. It established a few important aspects of the Santa Claus story, being the first known publication to set the gift-giving date to December 24th, and to speak of a sleigh pulled by a reindeer. 2 years later, Clement Clarke Moore anonymously published his A Visit from St. Nicholas poem. This would be a hit across America and even beyond. The poem speaks of a right jolly old elf who delivers presents to good children. He arrives aboard a sleigh driven by 8 flying reindeer and enters and leaves the house via the chimney, leaving his presents and stockings hung up by the fireplace. By the Civil War, Santa Claus had become a well-known figure in America. Still, what exactly this Santa Claus looked like remained undetermined. Washington Irving's brother-in-law, James K. Paulding, portrayed him as a small elf-like man in a blue peacoat who came to deliver gifts on New Year's Eve. In some of the images in Old Santa Claus with Much Delight, he is a skinnier man with a single reindeer. Clement Clarke Moore modeled his appearance on, quote, a rubicund old Dutchman, end quote, saying he was round, with a cheerful face, a beard as white as snow, and a pipe in his mouth. In 1863, Thomas Nast, a famous illustrator for Harper's Weekly, seems to have come up with a picture of Santa Claus that resembles our modern-day depiction. To any American, this 1881 depiction is unmistakably Santa Claus. Though already associated with the northern winter for a variety of reasons, it may have also been Nast who established his residence as the North Pole. Over time, several others would contribute lasting additions to Santa's image. In 1931, Coca-Cola, seeking to improve its slow winter income, began to use Santa to market beverages, and illustrator Haddon Sundblom provided some finishing touches, although the character and majority of his image was already established before this. And so what of Santa's other attributes, like his flying reindeer and the stockings in which he leaves presents? Irving noted that Santa traveled in a flying wagon, but did not establish what propelled it. The reindeer and sleigh seem to have been established in the poem Old Santa Claus with Much Delight. 2 years later, Moore gave Santa 8 reindeer and named them Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Dunder, Dutch for thunder, who later became Donner, and Blixen, Dutch for lightning, who later became Blitzen. The exact origins of the reindeer are unclear, but ultimately, the reindeer appear to have been the invention of the anonymous author or some other contemporary, as they don't appear to have had any clear origins in Germanic mythology or the story of St. Nicholas. Reindeer may simply have been chosen because Santa Claus needed a steed, or steeds, and reindeer live in the north. The 8 legs of Sleipnir and the 8 reindeer are likely coincidence. But the team was still incomplete. Let us recall the most famous reindeer of all. The story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was written by Robert L. May in 1939. The story of the young reindeer who finds a strength in his apparent flaw, a peculiar shining red nose, which was used to light Santa's way in poor weather, was so endearing that he quickly became a permanent member of the team. The famous Mrs. Claus was first mentioned in 1849 in James Rees's A Christmas Legend. Having taken a wife, Santa Claus was now well and clearly distinct from the Bishop of Anatolia. Though still sometimes viewed as a figure who embodies the Christian spirit of Christmas, today Santa Claus is often seen as a legendary figure not necessarily associated with religion. Now, why does he enter through the chimney and leave presents inside socks? Irving mentions his habit of dropping gifts down the chimney in his 1809 History of New York. Irving likely did not invent this aspect of the story himself, but there are so many explanations for its origins, from dubious claims of its relation to Odin, to Saint Nicholas, to Renaissance beliefs about magical creatures entering homes through chimneys, that it's hard to pinpoint an exact inspiration for this attribute. The gifts in the stockings, however, very likely relate to legends of Saint Nicholas secretly leaving gifts for others. In the story of the 3 girls, for example, it was sometimes said that the coins he tossed for them landed in the stockings they had hung up by the fire. The custom is almost certainly related to the shoes that children in European countries leave out for St. Nicholas to put presents in on his day. And so is the St. Nicholas Day tradition, where the practice of gift-giving on Christmas comes from overall. Perhaps. There are a great number of potential explanations, but the fact is, it's gift-giving. It's a very common practice that easily arises independently on its own, and thus it's hard to pinpoint a specific origin. In modern America, however, the Christmas stocking has become a bit of a sideshow. Today, the main presents are left under the Christmas tree. The Christmas tree is one of the most magical symbols of this holiday. There is indeed nothing quite like the calming and reassuring glow of one on a cold December night. But where did this tradition come from? The very common answer is Norse mythology and custom, but this is not likely. Trees were sacred to the pagan Norse, but there doesn't appear to have been as much specific emphasis on conifers as there was on ash or oak trees, and there is no evidence that evergreen trees had any specific role in Yule. As a side note, there is also no clear evidence that the Yule log, a separate but related tradition, came from paganism either. Likewise, evergreen plants seem to have been incorporated into the Roman Saturnalia, but this does not appear to have included evergreen trees. Still, the origin of the tradition may be pagan. It has been argued that it perhaps derives from Baltic pagan traditions which German settlers encountered in the Middle Ages as they conquered the area. However, numerous legends also point to Christian origins, and in fact, Christmas trees may not have much to do with paganism at all. One legend traces Christmas trees to a story surrounding Saint Boniface, a famous missionary to the Germanic peoples who, in the 8th century, cut down a sacred pagan oak tree in front of them. In its place grew a fir tree, which represented the Holy Trinity and in its triangular shape pointed to heaven. However, this addition of the evergreen tree to this story seems to have come into existence long after the 8th century. Throughout the Middle Ages, especially in the late Middle Ages, there are several vague references to what could be Christmas trees, or at least their predecessors. Perhaps the earliest clear reference to a Christmas tree dates back to writing from Cistercian monks in Portugal in the early 15th century. The writing instructs the reader on how to place oranges and candles on the branches of a tree on Christmas. However, unless this tradition developed independently in Portugal, it likely came from elsewhere, as Christmas trees, like a noticeable number of Christmas traditions, ultimately appear to be German in origin. There is a record from southwestern Germany in 1419, roughly the same time, of a tree that was used around Christmas time in connection with a mystery play representing Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The tree was decorated with apples, nuts, wool thread, flour paste wafers, tinsel, and gingerbread. Christmas trees may therefore have an origin in Christian symbolism of the tree of paradise, with apples representing the forbidden fruit and wafers the Eucharist. Throughout the 15th and 16th centuries, there are numerous references to a custom in northern Germany and Livonia, the latter region being a part of the Baltic, of merchant guilds erecting trees for decoration. The trees were, again, decorated with things like apples, nuts, sweets, and paper flowers, although it isn't quite clear if and or when this custom pertained to Christmas or any winter festival. Though it is likely that Christmas trees predated him, the Protestant reformer Martin Luther is often connected to Christmas trees and is sometimes credited with having invented the modern symbol. He is said to have placed candles on them to represent the stars of heaven. Indeed, for a time, Christmas trees were seen as a specifically Lutheran thing, whereas Catholics were at first more likely to exclusively focus on nativity scenes, until the custom of trees grew on them as well. Regardless of their origins, firm evidence of modern Christmas trees is first recorded in 1576 in Turkheim, a city then in the Holy Roman Empire. According to Judith Flanders, author of the book Christmas, a Biography, the first indoor Christmas trees are recorded in the city of Strasbourg in 1605. These trees are similar in appearance to the trees of paradise described a moment ago, being decorated with apples, roses, wafers, and the like. Both of these cities are located in Alsace, a region which is today a part of France but was in the past a part of Germany. Throughout the 18th century, Christmas trees became much more common throughout the Protestant areas of Germany. Though it may have also reached England in this time, it was during the 19th century, often alongside German immigration, that Christmas trees truly began to spread across Europe and beyond. The German-born Queen Charlotte, wife of the English King George III, seems to have introduced a Christmas tree to the children of the royal family in 1800. However, the custom would not spread beyond the royal family until the reign of Queen Victoria, who, along with her German-born husband, had been familiar with these traditions all her life and kept the tradition consistently. Once it became popular with the royal family, it was imitated across the English-speaking world. By the 1840s, Christmas trees were popping up in homes across Britain. The United States followed close behind. This occurred at the same time that the custom was becoming popular in places like France, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe, due to German influence. Today, to many, Christmas is a simple time of friends, of family, of cultural and religious traditions, and of celebration. Still, as a holiday with such prominence in many societies, it is a subject which has inevitably sparked many different debates. Christmas is both a cultural and religious holiday, but some debate about one influencing the holiday too much, at the cost of the other. Some fear the shallow commercialization of the holiday as a threat to both its cultural and religious traditions. Some believe that Christmas is unchristian, and others reject it for being too Christian. There is concern in some countries as well of Anglo-American traditions encroaching on their own. These debates are very complicated and can be difficult to resolve. But, as we have seen, Christmas has always been the subject of debate, and these debates will likely continue for many years to come, seeing as how it's as popular as ever and doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And yet, however Christmas has been molded and shaped throughout the millennia, it has always retained an unbreakable hold on people. There is something powerful at the core of Christmas. We see that in many societies. As we see in January, winter is the most depressing time of the year, and yet it begins with Christmas, which is often measured as the happiest. The power of Christmas is such that in the First World War, it caused bitter enemies across trenches to lay down their arms and celebrate together. Though Christmas will likely change as societies change, one must wonder if that which is at the core of the Christmas spirit, having been discovered, could ever truly disappear. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, I invite you to come check out the rest of Fire of Learning, and to subscribe to see more videos like this in the future. To support the production of these videos, you may help with a donation on Patreon, the link to which is in the description. A special thanks to our current patrons, once again listed here. I also run a science channel called Lucinox, which may interest you as well. And now, ladies and gentlemen, in the words of a friend to us all, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.